You look a little gray today. What's happening?
Gray?
Not the hair.
Gray in the face? I don't know. I mean, Hi, Stefan.
Yeah, let's welcome.
How you doing, Milos? Good to see you again, brother. I bumped into Milos here in Vegas at a UFC fight not too long ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another thing that I want to talk to Stan about, because somehow he got involved. He was working with John Jones, which is one of my all-time favorite fighters, of course. And but I wanted to see, what is Stan Efferding up to, man? Stan, I see you do a lot of stuff with coaching, not only bodybuilders, but athletes from all walks of life. You do a lot with fighters now. How did you get to do all that?
I got to be honest with you. Mark Bell has probably been the person that has given me the most referrals. He put me in touch with Hafthor Bjornsson. He put me in touch with Brian Shaw. Through Mark Bell, I got in touch with Lane Johnson from the Philadelphia Eagles. He put me in touch with John Jones. Mark's just been fantastic, talking to people about what they might need and then recommending they reach out to me. And then the rest is history. I've had an opportunity to work with some phenomenal athletes over the years. It's truly an honor. I got to be honest with you. I must admit, they're the easiest people to work with. They're the most genetically gifted. They're the hardest working. They're the most disciplined. And if they trust you, they'll generally do what you ask them to do, and so the results are good.
Right. So once you start working, let's use John Jones as an example. You start working with an athlete like John Jones, who's considered the best fucking fighter in the world, all time, best fighter. Definitely in the conversation. Now, how do you prepare to work with someone like him?
It's interesting you'd ask that, because I always wonder to myself when I work with a great athlete, what can I do for this guy? He's already one of the best athletes in the world. John was already a 14-time defending UFC champion. Hafthor Bjornsson was already one of the greatest strongmen on the planet. Brian Shaw was already a 4-time Mr. World's Strongest Man. All of these guys, I always wonder the same thing. But what I find out is when you sit down with them and you go over all the things that we all know that are important for performance, for health, for strength and power and all those things, I often find some gaping holes in their game. I find that oftentimes they're successful in spite of themselves, and you guys will understand this, they're probably doing things that aren't helping them just because they've always done them. And it can be hard to enter into those conversations, because oftentimes they believe those things work, and you got to be careful about the placebo effect. But if through some discussions you can convince them that maybe those things are potentially costing them, and what I call a cost-benefit analysis, the time and energy they invest into those things could be better spent doing something else. Right. I'll be specific about some big rock with Hafthor and Brian Shaw, Lane Johnson. All of them had some degree of metabolic syndrome. All of them had, because of their weight, they all had a little fatty liver. They all had some insulin resistance. They all had slightly elevated blood pressure and blood sugars. And we determined that through blood testing, of course. And none of them were wearing their CPAP, which you guys know how important that is for, especially for big, heavy athletes with thick necks. They all had some degree of apnea, some worse than the other. And that can have a huge, huge impact on blood pressure, first and foremost, but also just in recovery from training, their general sense of well-being. And when you introduce, a CPAP into to someone who's got a severe case of sleep apnea, it's life-changing for them. They just feel better and their health improves. So you might improve the longevity of their career, and you certainly might improve the ease at which, behind the scenes, how much effort they have to put into what they do. And I guess that gets us to John Jones specifically. John wasn't sleeping very well, and John had, and oftentimes he would only eat once or maybe twice a day. And he was trying to gain weight to get into the heavyweight class. And John liked to go to restaurants, and so those don't always serve the optimal macros for performance. They're generally much higher in fat and typically lower in protein. for the amount of calories that you get. And so, we made some changes there that really helped him just to have more energy. And then he was already really strong. Let's say deadlifting. He could deadlift almost 600 pounds. It was phenomenal to watch John. He was very, very strong. But his posterior chain, he wasn't very good at some of the hamstring exercises, which probably lends itself better to things like takedowns, hip extension. And so we just kind of looked at where he wasn't as strong and focused on that more. So those are probably some of the biggest examples. I guess lastly, specifically with respect to John, he trained very, very hard all the time. And he had a lot of different coaches pulling him in a lot of different directions. And so what we tried to do was design kind of a master program that looked at his fatigue. Because if he would come in and lift really heavy with us, and then he would go and he would do some hard wrestling, you'd start accumulating a significant amount of fatigue, and he'd just be too tired to continue at that pace. So the coaches had to communicate and say, okay, today we're doing this, it's high fatigue. Tomorrow we're doing this, it's lower fatigue, like jujitsu or mitts. And we were real cautious about, everybody has, we call limited physical capital, and we were very cautious about just how much fatigue we accumulated so that he could recover and continue to perform at a high level.
When a high-class athlete like John Jones, how many coaches does he work with at the same time?
Well, John likes to surround himself with a lot of people. John's the kind of guy who wants to know as much as he possibly can. We talk about his ring IQ. That doesn't happen in the ring necessarily. Obviously, he's got a lot of experience. Outside of the ring, he prepares for everything. Watches tons and tons of video, works with the best jiu-jitsu black belt that he can find, works with a professional boxer, works with a 6'5", 300-pound wrestler that's a professional fighter in mixed martial arts, Bellator in particular. Obviously, Jackson Wink, Greg Jackson, Mike Winklejohn are fantastic coaches for his specific martial arts stuff. He's got a strength and conditioning coach. He's got a strength coach, and then he's got a conditioning coach. We came in initially, I came in for nutrition. So he worked with me for diet. But we had so much fun actually lifting weights because, I love lifting weights.
Right.
That he wanted me to hang around just probably purely for motivation. And then we brought in a speed coach, Matt Whittemer out of Beat Training in Cincinnati is a speed coach. And we brought in a $25,000 overspeed treadmill really to help John increase his speed overall, his entire nervous system speed, not just the sprinting that you saw him do, but the effects that has for power and explosiveness. So he had, add him up. He's got a lot of guys around him, and he asks a lot of questions, and he reads a lot, and he watches a lot of videos. He watches all the other fighters. He watches all their training programs, and he asks this question about those. John is the consummate athlete. He's constantly seeking knowledge, and the challenge with that, I'll have to toss in here. The challenge with that, I call it the shiny object syndrome. That a lot of athletes will see a lot of things on Instagram and not know, as we do from decades of training, what's beneficial and what's nonsense. And so sometimes, we have to kind of carefully, guide John in a direction that's going to give him the best benefit, as I kind of opened with, and so that he doesn't end up doing things that don't really help his performance.
I catch something I have to ask you, because you say he is super analytical, study, but then he hires you as a nutritionist. In the meantime, he's eating once a day and not nutritious food. So it's mind-boggling to me, because I've been there back in 2000 with that Project World Record, talking to Marion Jones, Tim Montgomery, all these people, and their diet was, whatever you think, 10 times worse. It's like highest level of an athlete performing, fastest man alive, fastest woman alive, right? And here, John Jones, baddest ass alive. These guys, without question, Dennis, you mentioned one of the it's definitely D1.
For me,
you know?
he is. For me, he is absolutely. You
Yeah,
know, but
yeah, I
you, but
think
you know,
so.
you know how some people trying to, he was, suspended, this and that. I don't give a shit. For me, he's the best fighter in the world, and he just proved it when he choked out Cyril Gahn in less than 3 minutes or whatever that was.
And do you have Stan? Do you have a wrestling background?
I do. I wrestled in high school, but I don't give John advice on fighting.
But how did you change his diet?
No, let me finish, man. I was gonna say, because I wrestled in high school and college, but I know for a fact that the dietary mindset of a wrestler is just not to eat, and not to eat that much, and train at a high level and wrestle at a high level and put out so much energy, more than you can ever imagine as a person, as a great athlete. But when I started bodybuilding, then I started to understand I needed a lot more food, and I was happy to be able. I was like, I thought bodybuilding was easy coming, coming from where I came from to where, oh, now I can eat, and I was like, oh man, this is easy, because I was used to not eating much at all and putting out a high amount of energy every day when we wrestled. We had like a 95-degree wrestling room that we wrestled in college, and that shit was like a concentration camp. And it was like crazy. But that's what I was accustomed to. So when I come to bodybuilding, I was like eating 5 and 6 times a day, even if you put something in your mouth that many times a day.
Yeah, but now imagine what them camps are like in Cuba.
Yeah.
Shit, they don't feed you if you don't put out right.
Chris, I hear you loud and clear, and I still work with high school and collegiate wrestlers. As a matter of fact, right now I work with the U.S. Olympic women's wrestling team.
Wow.
And sometimes they have to make weight, and that becomes a limiting factor in terms of the total amount of food you can feed them. But then it becomes secondarily important. We know calories are king. You want to gain weight, surplus. You want to lose weight, deficit. We know that. But if they have to be in a deficit to make a weight class, then you got to leverage everything else. You got to make sure they're getting sufficient protein, which is kind of hard to do in a calorie deficit. Ideally, the International Society of Sports Nutrition recommends evenly spaced protein feedings frequently throughout the day. Probably 4 times a day for an athlete should be expected as a minimum. And so the hard part is just having that consistency and discipline to get 4 evenly spaced feedings with sufficient protein, meaning 30 plus grams per meal. And I'll write up the diet. It doesn't look any different. Everybody, on this panel, and certainly most of the people watching, know what that looks like. You get a variety of lean protein sources. You get sufficient carbohydrates, primarily, at least initially, from high potassium sources, potatoes, fruit, etc. And you meet your calorie demands and your meal frequency and protein, and that probably covers most of the bases. But then you give them a diet, and adherence becomes the most difficult part. I call it compliance is the science. And you have to help them get from where they are to complying. It's 1% information and 99% execution. And so I'll get pictures. I ask them to send me pictures of every meal that they eat. And so in the case of the Olympic women's wrestling team, I'll give them a diet. I went down there and I bought them a grill, a Ninja grill, showed them how to cook the food, showed them exactly what to purchase at Costco, gave them a grocery shopping list, sent them prep meals, as a matter of fact. And then I get pictures of a breakfast that's a bagel and cream cheese with a chobani. And I get a picture of a lunch that's 2 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. and
a glass of milk.
At some point, it's not really the magic of the diet that you write up. The magic is in, can you help them get from where they're at to where you want them to be, with all the other demands that they have, with practice, with school, with, all of those things. It has to be something that they can actually comply with. So that's the challenge most of the time.
For sure.
Let me back up a little bit, because you said something earlier that interests me, because a lot of people don't even know if they have an issue or not. You're talking about sleep apnea. How would someone know that he has an issue? Does he have to go do their tests? Should everybody just go and do that sleep test, or can you, or are there any indications that you have a problem?
Yeah, you can go on the internet and Google stop, S-T-O-P, bang, B-A-N-G, stop bang. That's a questionnaire that allows you to ask yourself some questions and determine what your potential risk of apnea is. Generally speaking, if you snore and wake up tired, you probably have some degree of apnea. And that, particularly if you're an athlete, a larger athlete with a thick neck, waist over 42 inches, let's say, then you should follow that up with a sleep study. The challenge that is, what I find is that either a lot of these athletes just don't have doctors or can't afford. I mean, sleep studies can be $1,500. And so there becomes a cost as a barrier of entry.
Is that
internationally?
That's not covered by the insurance?
Maybe they don't have insurance. Is the problem.
Okay.
A lot of these athletes don't have insurance. Or internationally, whether it be Canada, Australia, Iceland in the case of Hafthor, internationally, where they have socialized medicine, it may take many, many months to get seen. And even then, if you don't have a severe case of apnea, the recommendation would be just to lose weight in order to solve that problem. And as you and I both know, most of these strength athletes aren't interested in losing weight. So that's not a solution. So what I often do is I ask them to get a CPAP or try and help them find a CPAP, either on Craigslist or I've actually got a reseller that refurbishes machines and ships them to my clients, in which case they can use those to wear those so they can solve their apnea problem.
I remember guys, Chris was on the plane too at that time. We flew from, I think we came back from Australia, and Guy Sistanino was sitting next to me, and he had this machine.
Yeah.
He looked like an F-15 pilot getting ready to take off. I said, yeah,
I was on United.
but here's, yeah, exactly. I'm telling myself, how can you sleep with this thing on? You can't, because, I'm a sleeper. I move around. I turn around. I twist and turn and do all this crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And you can't do that with that machine on.
Yeah, the alternative is that you hold your breath frequently throughout the night, and then you end up getting high blood pressure, elevated hemoglobin and hematocrit, thick blood as a result. You end up not recovering from your workouts, brain fog. There's a whole host of, ED, increased muscle loss, especially when you're dieting. So there's a whole host of things that happen if you don't use the CPAP. And so for an athlete that's trying to optimize performance, that's one of the drawbacks. It might be uncomfortable. You might have to just sleep on your back, of course, because if you turn around, the machine's going to get obstructed with your pillow or what have you. So there is a learning curve in the comfort. It has to be takes maybe take a little while to get used to it.
That will be very
results are life-changing.
Yeah.
And I'm hesitant to say that. We've all been in the business for decades, and we don't glamorize very much.
Yeah.
But a CPAP, the results are life-changing. It really is an intervention that can create massive changes for an athlete.
I used to snore like a fucking hippo, But since I lost weight, I do not snore whatsoever. Matter of fact,
that's the solution. That's the most common recommended solution for apnea is to lose weight.
Yeah, because my father was the same. My father used to snore, man. I used to hear him through the whole house. And as soon as he started losing weight, he stopped snoring too. But the problem for me is I sleep on my stomach.
Yep.
Face in the pillow like somebody got knocked out. That's how I sleep. I could never sleep on my back.
Yeah, well, sleeping on your stomach or your side might actually help apnea because it usually has to do with neck girth and the weight of all the tissue around your airway collapsing at night, and that usually is worse on your back. So some people find some relief by sleeping on their side, but you find big athletes when they try and sleep on their side or even on their stomach, generally they get shoulder problems or their lower back hurts, and so it's kind of, you got to kind of play with it a little bit.
Yeah,
but it's sleep, of course, it's the foundation upon which everything else sits, and so we prioritize.
Right, Milos, do you have any issues with sleep apnea?
I'm sure. For 40 years, right? But I would never. I know myself. There is no way on earth that I can put anything on myself. I'm first claustrophobic, and I have a trouble imagining that I'm going to lose breathing. And anything you put on, I tried it. It's like there's no way I would not fall asleep with it. That was impossible.
So, but are you?
I have mixed feelings about this. I have a lot of people that it's life changing, it's unbelievable, and then there is no way in hell. I mean, yeah, sleep is essential, absolutely. The way we respirate, I mean, the more you constrict your breathing, lesser your life. You know, it's just like, I don't know what kind of correlation exactly. If you're restricting your breathing, yeah, you're lowering your lifespan. So I understand all that. But many people got the CPAP, tried it, and get in a panic mode and don't use it.
Yeah.
You know, so this is, I mean, this, of course, every time I heard, even right now, Stan, I was going to say, like, maybe after the show, I was like, okay, let me give another try and try to order one.
Smaller ones now, though, right?
But I know, I mean, I'm like you, Dennis. I sleep on the side or on my stomach. I cannot fall asleep on my back, you know, for the life of me. Yeah. And
well, you know, back in the early 1990s, when I first started getting north of, say, 240, 250 pounds, is when I started experiencing apnea. But back then, the machines were actually CPAPs, which is continuous positive airway pressure. It was like driving down the freeway with no windshield. It was just all night long. That thing was just blowing air into your face. Now they have what's called BiPAPs. So when you exhale, the machine interprets that and it stops pushing air in. And they also have these auto PAPs that have a range of pressure, and it can determine whether or not you are effectively getting enough air, and it will give you more or less air within a particular range based on your needs throughout the night. So they are significantly more comfortable than they used to be. That is one of the, you know, Milos is right. That's one of the things that we have to do initially, is try and work with the client to make sure it has the right mask, the right settings, and all of that to make sure it's comfortable for them.
I'll tell you something, you know, just, sorry, I got a message from Regan just when we started. He is the one that needed desperately. Manager Matt was on his case, and then he got one, and panic mode, he couldn't do it. So he got him another one, right? And about 2 weeks ago and stuff, you know, Regan's kind of like, that machine blow his air, his stomach. I mean, he woke up with he says he's never been so bloated in his life. Okay.
Yeah. Another thing is, some people, when they go to sleep, their mouth will open, and the air will go straight into their mouth and into their stomach. And so using mouth tape.
Hey, that's why I hate to fly.
People always ask how I got here. I was willing to work just a little harder than everyone else, every damn day. If I can have hundreds of hours back, you know I'm gonna grab them. Spending hours prepping chicken, rice, and vegetables, F that. I rely on perfect nutrition. I rely on trifecta.
I hate to fly where you can't lay down, when you have to be in the seat, because this is how I end up.
Yeah.
Me too.
I hate that shit about myself.
Yeah. Well, mouth tape helps with that. So then we advise them to use some mouth tape.
Have you seen that? I saw that lately.
Yep, it's very helpful.
My wife took pictures of me sleeping, sitting down. I look like I'm dead, like a dead person.
Hey, I can send you the video. I'm not breathing for 1 minute.
Oh, really?
Yeah, for my wife taped me. And
but that's dangerous.
Hey, I guess 50-something years, I got used to it.
Here's what I would like to do. I would like, because I heard, and you mentioned it too, it helps you sleep better.
Yeah.
I would like to, because I'm jealous when I see people that say I slept 8 hours straight. This not in my life. I sleep. I can sleep all the time. I have no problem, but I wake up. It's 4 hours. If I can sleep 4 hours nonstop, that's a good day. You know, because at night I wake up to go to pee because my prostate is telling me to get up. And even when I'm on the couch, there's no way that I can sleep through. If I can manage something like this to sleep through, that would be worth for me putting on a mask.
A couple notes on that. One, most importantly, is that sleep, as you know, goes through cycles, these 90-minute cycles. And they're continuous, they're back to back. And each subsequent cycle has a longer and longer REM and restorative sleep cycle. And so it's when you get into that 5th, 6th, 7th plus hour that you get the most restorative, most REM sleep for both the brain and the body, which is why it's not ideal to get a couple of 3-hour sessions. It's ideal to get a 7+ hour session. And then secondly, on the BPH, benign prostatic hyperplasia, you get a increased sense of urgency, maybe incomplete evacuation, maybe getting up numerous times throughout the night. Tadalafil is very effective at reducing the symptoms, just a 5 milligram a day dose. It's Cialis.
That's what I'm doing.
Generic
That's what I'm doing. I was prescribed, and I use 5 milligrams, but I still get up. Not as much, but I still get up.
Good. Yep, it does have some benefit.
But the thing is, for me, I don't have a problem getting up, go to the bathroom, go back, and fall right back to sleep. I don't have an issue.
That's great.
So I can literally.
I'll tell you a story.
Huh?
I'll tell you Flex Wheeler's story while we're on this topic.
I was going to ask you about Flex.
Yeah, I'll tell you, when I was training with Flex back in 2008 and 2009, I flew down to San Jose and I lived there for 4 months. I trained with him every day, twice a day. I stayed in one of those hotels with a kitchen right across the street from the 24-hour fitness there next to the airport in San Jose. And Flex, he was huge on water. He always wanted me to drink 2 gallons of water a day. And so I had never drank that much water previously, purposely. And today I recommend a little less water and of course, mixing it with a little bit of sodium and glucose for better absorption. But so I was peeing all the time. And I would drink 2 gallons of water a day with Flex. And so I was having to get up 2-3 times a night to go pee. And I had my CPAP and the whole thing was just kind of burdensome after a while. So Flex told me, he said, just get one of those Rubbermaid kitchen garbage cans. He said, just sit up, pee in it, go back to bed. So you don't have to. And so I did. And as the story goes, of course, we had housekeeping at the hotel. And one morning I forgot to empty it and I went to the gym. So the poor housekeeper had to come in and find that next to my bed. But, that was, it's actually, I got to be honest with you, it's my pops lives with me. He's 92 years old and he uses those little plastic pee bottles, because he can't get up in the middle of the night. He needs help to get around. And when my son broke his leg, he's 9 years old. He had to use a pee bottle because he couldn't get up and go to the bathroom. And so every time I get an individual that complains about having to get up and how it really interferes with their sleep, they turn on the light, they walk to the bathroom, they can't get back to sleep. I'm recommending they grab one of those little plastic bottles. That can actually be a good resolution. So,
But Flex was doing that because he was too lazy to go to the bathroom. True story.
Hey, you know who was doing it too? Melvin Anthony. I remember
hilarious.
I remember when I came over, I flew over from Thailand, because I wanted to support him at the 99 USS. I flew over from Thailand and I stayed with him. He had an apartment. He told me he had an apartment. I didn't know he had roommates. So, so Melvin was sleeping downstairs. Melvin was sleeping downstairs on the couch, and the bathroom was literally right there. He had a fucking gallon bottle, pissing in the bottle. He said, "I ain't getting up at night. I'm not getting up at night."
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Night is so and
what a
so.
freak.
I went to the gym in California for a meeting, and the owner was in the big desk and all that stuff, and all of a sudden you see him doing something, and then you hear he was peeing in a 1 gallon empty bottle, right? During our meeting. I said, "Oh, okay, man." I said, "You know what?
Hey, when the last time you pissed on yourself?
I can't recall that happening.
No. Oh, when the last time you pissed on yourself? Or the last time you had?
Man.
When the last time you had to pee without being in the toilet, in the bathroom?
I don't remember. Probably
You never had. You guys never had.
Yesterday outside my car.
I was about to say, you guys never had an accident.
I mean, not an accident, but the worst thing was Joe Withers' photo shoot, and I'm on a Freeway 5, and it's like not moving, and I'm on the diuretics.
Exactly.
It's like, Jesus Christ. So like I have to do something, but there's like 2 million cars. I didn't want to piss in my car, so I had to go out and in front of everybody. It was
I see. I would never do that. I pissed in the car. That's what I did.
Yeah, what would you do?
I pissed in the car, right? Right in between the pedals. Hey, listen.
It's a little embarrassing, but at least you
That's.
tried to pick it up.
But I told myself since then I would never ever, if I feel a slight urge to go, I will go. I will never get in the car and drive somewhere, because I stood in the traffic just like you, and I was like, God.
Yeah.
Oh, I could.
You know,
listen. I said it's either pants or pedals.
When
I started.
You know, Dennis,
Huh?
to reel this in, because we got way off topic here.
Yeah.
You know, the point of this conversation is that you guys all know, and Flex certainly taught me, that the more of these details that you manage, the better your performance is going to be. I talked about the fact that a lot of the athletes I work with, they've got gaping holes in their game, and they just there's a lot of things that I hate to say more disciplined, but we're really consistent, and we're very we pay more attention to a lot more details. And Dennis, this is apparent with all the guys that you train. It's that you're very particular. When Rami came to live with you, or when Melvin Anthony came to live with you, I mean, every meal was, measured to the exact ounce. Every minute of cardio, the intensity of the training, the schedule, the timing, and those guys performed extraordinarily well. I remember competing, I think it was in the Phoenix Pro against Melvin Anthony, and I was like 255 pounds, and Melvin, he's not a big guy, and we were all in our sweats. We're all standing back there, and of course, I'm looking at Melvin, I'm like, God, he looks small. He peeled off his sweats, and everything just popped all over his body, and of course, he won that show, decisively so. And while he was living with you, and then of course he moved away, and we saw this with Rami too. I don't want to speak out of hand here, but I think that they try and do less. I experienced that when I was training with Flex every day, twice a day, and doing everything that he said, every meal, every training session, every set, every rep, timed every rest period. I performed my best. And then when I went back home and I did about 70% of that, I didn't perform nearly as well. And so I see that when you have a very high attention to detail, which you do, people just perform better.
Why did you do 70%? When you went back, why did you continue 100?
I started, I would start hybriding the program. Instead of doing just hypertrophy, I was doing more of a power building program. Flex wouldn't let me do any of the power lifts. And of course, it's my baby. I wanted to go back and lift heavier, and I just didn't perform as well. He had me eating 4 pounds of top sirloin steak a day, 7 meals a day. Of course, I cut that down to 5 meals. I throw in some ground beef and a little chicken here and there. And I think to myself, oh, it's just as good. And that's why I'm a little more particular now. I understand what the science says, but I'm a little more particular when I look back, having the personal experience of being exposed to guys like you, who do things at such a high level with such specificity, that there is a difference, at our level. And I don't want to compare myself to you guys, but at a very high level, those inches and those ounces matter.
But I think people perform better under guidance from someone they respect. Like if you respect somebody, you're gonna perform.
You have to respect them. Otherwise, you won't do what you're told. But it's always, it's different.
Your brain is, I'm sorry, your brain is actually geared for you to succeed and wants you to do things to where you're gonna live. If you're hanging from a cliff, you're gonna get some astronomical amount of strength to not die.
Yeah.
So it's gonna be way higher than just walking out the door and
Well, I've always felt as though I trained very hard. And I trained back with Aaron Maddron, who was Mr. Intensity. He and I used to train together back in Eugene, Oregon.
I remember Aaron.
Remember Aaron Maddron?
Yes.
Yeah, big freak of a guy, hardworking guy. And so, I came up under that kind of environment. And so I always thought I trained really hard. I prided myself on how much damage I could do to my body. Flex took it to another level. And I see that too with you guys. When you train people, you get more out of them than they could probably get out of themselves. And that that made a huge difference. And it was probably one of the reasons that John Jones liked keeping me down there, because I mentioned we started training together, and it just took the level up another notch, at least as far as the strength and conditioning and power training went.
But let's, before we conclude with the John Jones, because we digressed because we are all huge fans of John. So you said back, he started eating just like once a day, and then he hired you as a nutritionist. So what was his diet like when he was training with you? Vertical diet?
Yes, vertical diet. We certainly tried to get more lean proteins, introduced a little more red meat. Piedmontese beef would send him food. I would send him food, just so he had a little more consistency. I would bother him more about eating. Also, his hydration protocol. John would typically just drink water, and so I would introduce a blend of water and salt and glucose, just so that he had a little more energy before and during training.
How much glucose and salt? I'm curious.
Well, the concentration is important. I'm glad you asked, because things like Gatorade, when it's very high in sugar, it actually increases the amount of urination that you'll do. It stimulates the kidneys to release water. If you're drinking just water, you end up peeing a lot of it out and actually maybe diluting some of your minerals and electrolytes. So the concentration matters. It should have about 200 to 300 milligrams of sodium per liter, along with about a 2 to 3% glucose solution, or about 20 to 30 grams of glucose. Could be dextrose, could be sucrose. I use dextrose just because it's a monosaccharide, and it tends not to bother my stomach. And so you can do it per liter or per gallon. If you do a gallon of water, you want to do about 1,000 milligrams of sodium, which is like 1 LMNT or 2 of the liquid IVs. And about 80 grams of carbs, which could be like 4 scoops of dextrose. And here's what's important. You drink that, sip that, from about an hour before training. You sip that all the way up to the workout and all throughout the workout. And you don't have to guzzle it. And the goal of that is not to replace glycogen or sodium that you're burning during training, because you sweat out salt and you burn obviously glycogen when you're training. The goal is to increase the effectiveness of the water's absorption from the gut into the lumen, into the bloodstream, or into the plasma in particular, which is 90+% water. The goal is just to keep yourself sufficiently hydrated so that you improve your performance during training.
Yeah, but here, okay, I love this topic. I use this for years for pre and intra workout and everything else, but not just for gradient and hydration. When you put 80 grams of glucose, of course it's going to...
Per gallon.
Oh, per gallon, yeah. Okay, so then it's like 30 grams per
20 grams per liter.
Yeah, so 30 grams per workout, and you have if you spread pre and intra, you probably have 2 liters easily, right?
I would think so. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've been doing this forever and ever. You know, for me, it was always like this: maintaining glycemia or not maintaining, using a glycogen. You're going to use a glucose, either from glycogen or for circulating glucose. I always like circulating glucose because of the whole idea of triggering insulin release as well. You know, for me, and I was last time actually I saw you for a seminar. We went to Charles Poliquin in a seminar, myself, you, and John Meadows. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you know, for Dennis and Chris, you guys don't know. Shortly after, that was September 1st, and Charles Poliquin died about 20th of September. You know, so that was the last time you know, I've seen him. But I don't know why did I mention this right now.
The glucose in water.
Yeah, glucose. You know, so yeah, I was always fighting with Charles. He didn't want to use glucose intra workout for years, and about 5 years before his death, he finally told me. He called me a cunt. He says, "Listen, you were right all along. For hypertrophy, there's nothing like it. For strength training, he didn't like it, but for hypertrophy, he absolutely approved high glycemia intra workout." And then saturation of the blood with everything useful that can be transported. So he actually, for years, we were doing seminars around the world. He always argued with me. You know, finally he admitted, and he even published it. I don't know if you've seen it.
What made him finally admit it? Did he do testing on it, or did he?
Yeah, he realized. Yeah, I mean, he's working with the highest level athletes, and he was a bodybuilder himself. I mean, as much as he doesn't call himself a bodybuilder, he was passionate. He had a, gym in every of his house, and in Phoenix when he was Dennis. I don't know if you remember, there was a Polykin Performance Center. But in any way.
No, that was way before I came here.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Probably.
Yeah, I met you know where I met Charles. I met him in the gym at Coliseum.
Yeah, me giving you a ART.
Yes, the first one. Yeah.
And you hated him, for it.
He hurt me.
Yeah, but all in all, I mean, I'm glad that Stan, you're using glucose and sodium. So you measure.
I want to know, but Stan, do you suggest this to everybody?
Well, it's interesting that Milos talked about powerlifting versus bodybuilding. Powerlifters probably don't have the same volume and intensity and shortened rest periods that would demand much extra water, salt, and glucose. They take longer rest periods. They have shorter sets. They do fewer sets overall. But bodybuilders, at least the way a lot of us trained, it was pretty intense. We do a lot of reps, a lot of sets, reasonably short rest periods, in which case, yeah, you definitely want to get hydrated. Certainly any athlete that's doing, say, martial arts or soccer or football or anything, even jogging, that kind of thing, on a competitive level, any running, cycling, any of that, it would help significantly. On the note of hypertrophy, I think some people presume to think that because you don't burn off all of your carbohydrate stores during training, you might only burn off 40, 50% of your carbs, that it wasn't necessary to have extra carbs or to be totally glycogen loaded for a training session. But I think what we found later in the years, at least this, what the research showed us, I mean, it's funny when you talk about the research. I share this with you guys because you've been doing this for so long. Guys like Brad Schoenfeld, probably one of the most highly regarded researchers in hypertrophy in the world, he's often said in his seminars, the bros were right. And that has to do a lot with the frequency and the volume. Most of the bodybuilders, when I used to drive down to Gold's Venice back in the late 80s from Oregon just to sit and watch those guys, Paul DeMeo and the rest of those guys all training down there in the early 90s, obviously Flex and Chris. I would just sit over in the corner and watch. Michael Hearn, I would sit over in the corner and watch. Just a little up-and-coming guy trying to learn things. Everybody would train twice a day, and they would do a significant amount of volume, and they would eat 6-7 meals a day, and they would nap every afternoon, and they would sleep 8-9 hours a night. All of that was really consistent.
Well, not Chris.
We found out, or at least,
How were you at? How old were you at that
Everybody, everybody was sleeping 8 or 9 hours, but not Chris.
I was working 5 nights at the nightclub, though, big dog.
Yeah, I was
working 5 nights a week at Roxbury.
I was probably 21 the first time I went down there in 1990 or 89, right about that.
Okay.
The first time I went down there, but I would take that trek about at least once a year. I would drive down there from Eugene, Oregon, all the way down to Venice. But
that was the spot, right? That was the spot.
That was the spot. Everybody was there training, and I'd try and sneak in some questions. But here's what we found. I mentioned that you don't deplete all of your glycogen in a workout, and people often use that as an excuse for not needing to load up on glycogen. But what we found out is that most of the studies that determined how much glycogen you used would grind up the entire muscle in these studies and see how much glycogen was depleted. But apparently the glycogen stored in different compartments in the muscle, and it's used primarily, at least first, out of the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and that's what triggers the muscle contraction. And so you didn't have to deplete all of your glycogen to see a decline in performance. You only had to deplete a small amount of it, which was initially and primarily used from that sarcoplasmic reticulum, and that's why people found that when they were more glycogen loaded and drank carbs before and during training, they would just have a better workout. They could do a few more sets, a couple more reps. They could train a little longer, a little harder. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's the intensity of that bout that matters the most. It's not crossing T's and dotting I's. It's not training twice a day. It's not doing 8 or 12 sets of 8 or 10 reps. It's how intense that workout is. And that can be compromised by poor sleep, poor hydration, poor nutrition, obviously glycogen depletion. And every workout has to be, as we all know, it has to be better than the one before. There isn't some progression. If you aren't getting stronger, one more rep, 5 more pounds, or one more set, more volume load over time, you're not going to progress.
I'm glad you mentioned all that stuff. You see, my whole theory is always maximizing, not compromising, optimizing, minimizing all this shit.
Yep.
You're going to maximize. So once I have that argument with Dave Palumbo, right? He goes, "Oh, come on, Milos, glycogen." It's like you can drive the car with a half gas tank of gas, right? You don't need the full one. I said, this is not mechanics, that's biology, right? So as you were saying that glycogen from different compartment, you still deplete cytoplasmic, and you affect your performance, and you affect your pump, and you affect your sleep, everything.
I'll give you a better analogy. That's the analogy people used to use. You can drive your car on half a tank of gas just as fast. The better analogy is fill up a balloon with air, a balloon that's completely full, as opposed to a balloon that's only a quarter full. Very different in terms of its performance. And that's how it's relative.
I'll use that one.
Yes, that's how it's relative to where glycogen is stored in the muscle and where it's preferentially used.
Now, Stan, explain to me, what is vertical diet? Because I see it all the time.
Yeah, it's a brand that I started. It's not just a diet. It's everything that I want my clients to do. You guys know when you get a client, there are a lot of the things that you ask them to do are the same. Sleep, hydration, nutrition, training, blood testing, blood pressure, blood sugar, all the health things that you want to control. And rather than repeating myself over and over and over to all my clients, I compiled everything that I thought was important, the whole being greater than the sum of its parts. I said that we pay a lot of attention to a lot of what might be considered small details because we know that cumulatively those provide better outcomes. And so the vertical diet is really just that. I send it to my clients, and it's not cookie cutter. I certainly give them a detailed questionnaire and try and customize a program to their goals. But things like sleep optimization, obviously breaking down nutrition, as we mentioned earlier, in terms of calories, macros, micros. I just try and make sure they understand what the big rocks are and that those things they pay the most attention to. Probably a lot of it came from, when I sat down with Flex Wheeler in 2008 at Firehouse there in Venice. I had a yellow notepad of paper, and we sat down, and I really, this was one of the most exciting days of my life. I still remember it because after having followed him for all those many, many years, if not decades, I was going to get to ask him all the questions, all the things that I wanted to know. It was like meeting the Wizard of Oz and having him pull back the curtain and telling me how all of the machinery really worked. And we sat there, and I asked him questions, and we talked for damn near 2 hours. I ate those blueberry pancakes with the banana inside that always give me diarrhea, but they're so good. Every time I go there, I eat those things. An hour later, I'm running for the toilet. It's so good. But I always tell this story, and Flex feels somewhat insulted every time I tell the story. But at the end of an hour and a half or almost 2 hours, I had nothing written on the piece of paper. Because Flex did not tell me about some magical thing that we were going to, secretly do. Flex just reiterated how hard we were going to focus on the things that matter most. And that's why I ended up moving to San Jose and training with him every day, because it was, and he took me through every single workout, as mentioned. But it was, it was the 7 meals a day, the 2 very hard training sessions, the 8+ hours of sleep. The nap every afternoon. It was the big stuff that mattered the most. And he just kind of, he helped me to, I think, understand or prioritize those things. And that's what I do in the vertical diet. I set things up in a hierarchy of most to least importance so that people can focus on those things that matter most.
All right. Now we know what that means.
Just last night I was going through the Instagram and a feed, Stan popped with, he was going into the Olympia event when Johnny Jackson was are going to be fighting for the
Oh,
strongest
strongest bodybuilder in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they show Stan's lifts. I had no idea, Stan, that those were your totals. So what is your all-time? They compare Ronnie Coleman doing whatever, 1 rep, and then Stan doing like 7, stuff like that. So what are your best lifts in all 3 lifts?
Yeah, well, first of all, Ronnie's the GOAT, and he's got how many Mr. O rings? I have 0. But I was strong. I was a better power lifter than a bodybuilder for sure. And I did set multiple all-time world records in powerlifting. And
World record.
My best total was 2,303 pounds raw. I squatted 865, benched 606, deadlifted 837 in competition.
Jeez.
And so that was always kind of my bag. What's funny about that is that
what body weight?
I was 275. I weighed 275 in those meets. When I first started bodybuilding, I thought the stronger you got, the bigger you got. And so I just focused on how much I lifted. I didn't focus on range of motion. I didn't focus on isolating muscle groups. I didn't focus on volume, frequency. And that's why after all those years of training heavy, I was squatting 800 pounds and my legs were skinny. I had a huge ass and very strong spinal erectors. And that's why Flex wouldn't let me Flex wouldn't let me squat for a single time for I think 7 or 8 months straight, because I would load the weight on my ass. I have a long femur, and that's kind of my anthropometry is such that I tend to back squat quite a bit and keep a vertical shin. So he would make me do exercises that created a whole lot of knee angle, a whole lot more range of motion or muscle length in the quad. He wouldn't let me bench press. He made me do dumbbells and get my shoulders out of the movement and keep my sternum high. He wouldn't let me deadlift. And the range of motion in deadlifting doesn't lend itself well to bodybuilding anyhow. And so he would do a ton of chin up and chest supported rows. And he was excellent at putting me in positions where I was weak to try and build up volume and muscles that historically I didn't have.
That's what I was telling people. I said I was very strong, but I never got my chest to the size that I wanted it to be by going so heavy, doing 5 something on the incline. It never equaled out to what I wanted. That's what I tell people all the time. They don't believe me. I'm like, okay, do what you're doing. Yeah. Do what you're doing.
Chris and I both were doing those 200-pound incline dumbbell presses.
Oh yeah.
But they don't build a big chest. When it came time to build a chest, I never went over 100 pounds. And Flex would make sure that my elbows were really, really deep, and that I was squeezing and contracting, and that I didn't bring my shoulders into the movement. He made me keep my sternum high and the shoulders back and stretch the pec around the rib cage. And those are things I didn't do when I was incline pressing the 200-pound dumbbells. I kept the shoulders high. I bounced the dumbbell off of my chest so my elbow wasn't very deep. All of those things it's more of a circus sideshow trick. Who was the guy that did those circus sideshow tricks, the assisted lifts? Was it Vinny? What was his name?
Jimmy Valencia.
Jimmy Valencia, that's it, right? Valencia. He would do those assisted lifts, He did some of that down in Venice too, didn't he?
Yeah, but he did do some 130-pound curls. I saw. He lived in Palm Springs when I was there also at one time. So I knew him.
Hammer curl.
Yeah. But he did 1,000-pound assisted bench. I would do 1,000-pound assisted bench with Stan deadlifting, behind me.
Right. Two side spotter.
Awesome. Listen, guys, let's talk about Tampa Pro last weekend. Stan, did you follow? You still follow bodybuilding?
I do. I had a chance to see some of the pictures that came through on social media. I was in Washington, D.C. last weekend presenting at a Super Coaches Summit, so I didn't get the chance to watch as much as I wanted to.
We just talked about in the last couple of podcasts, we talked about open bodybuilding in the big boys. that we talk about the numbers, that the numbers are so, I mean, we have so many more pros now, but when you look at the shows, and Vancouver was 6 or 7 competitors, in Chicago, 7 competitors or whatever, you know, and now in Tampa, which is really a very popular show for bodybuilders where everybody wants to go to Tampa. Where usually it's 20, 30 guys, and it was the same. Was it, what, 7 or maybe 8?
8, I think, yeah.
You know?
You're talking about the open heavyweight.
Yes, I'm talking about the open category, yes. And
Yeah, but not the men's classic.
no, the
bodybuilding.
classic was 30 plus. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you know, that's
I
what.
got to tell you, when I was 140 pounds as a freshman in college and 18 years old, and I picked up a bodybuilding magazine, and I wanted to look like that. Back then, if as 6 feet tall, you need to be north of 250. Back then, they were only giving away 1 pro card at the USA, the overall champion, and 1 pro card per weight class at the nationals, and the weight classes were under 198 and over 198.
Right.
So I don't think people realize how hard it was to get an IFBB pro card back then as compared to now. They give out over 100 cards a year. But whether you give out 100 cards a year or not, to be 250, 260 plus pounds on stage as a heavyweight in the IFBB, that is a lifetime undertaking. You're either extremely genetically gifted and hardworking and you know are able to achieve that in maybe 10 years, but you can become a classic pro if you're gifted, if you're a high school lacrosse athlete in a matter of 4 years if you're gifted enough. And these obviously are some pretty genetically gifted, have some good predisposition. They're hyper responders. And so I think that's the big difference, is that those classic bodybuilding guys, I mean, the difference between where they're at and where the heavyweight pros are at is pretty significant. The amount of mass those guys carry is outrageous.
Different world.
Yeah.
A different world.
But let's talk about tempo real quick.
Yeah.
What do you guys think, man? I mean, Hunter LABRADA, man, continuously improves every year, and I think this was the best Hunter that I've ever seen. I don't think I've seen better. I haven't seen him better than this. I mean, and I'm putting Hunter right now into the top 5 at the Olympia.
Well, you gotta imagine he improved so much, and he had got good placings when he didn't even look half as good as this.
I know, but I think Hunter is one of the very few, and Nick Walker also, that they pay attention to everything, all year round, not just when the contest prep starts. All year, this dude is in shape all year. He does not go off. He does not. His body never looks like he's off season. And I think that's why he's making these little improvements. He's getting better every year, and I think he's at a point right now where he can stand with the best of them.
That's what I second that, man. He's always improving and trying to get better, all the time, and I like that about him.
Yeah.
First, it's LABRADA genetics, right? Plus 60 pounds. I mean, when I talked to him before, he says like, "Hey, do you realize I'm like 60 pounds heavier than my dad?" I'm like, oh shit, right? I don't think that the height differential is so much. I can see now. I can see. I was thinking going into the Texas show that I would put my money on Andrew Jack, because I just like this height and width and shape and crispiness and all that stuff, right? But now when I see pose by pose, I think that LABRADA can give him hell and possibly beat him. Of course, one thing that I see on Hunter, he still has an issue with the stomach.
Yeah.
He doesn't know how to really contract and glue to the spine and set. And you can see this.
I don't think he trains it that much, to be honest with you.
Actually, even a year ago, I
look like it should be a lot more developed than that.
But I think it's not that significant. I think it's something that he can fix quick.
Yeah, but so visualize him and Andrew Jack in the front relax, and Andrew has the crazy abs, all that stuff, right? So just overall impression right away. Ooh, you can't help but maybe go towards the Andrew. Then you have a front lat spread, which is great for LABRADA by all means, but Andrew Jack is super good there too. Now front double biceps, both are great. I'm actually thinking that per square inch, pound for pound, the Hunter is maybe thicker and bigger.
Thicker legs.
Yeah, then turning to the side, Andrew has a great chest and all that stuff, but he doesn't look powerful in the side chest, especially legs look lengthy. And
And the
I think
tricep shot.
huh?
This conversation makes me think of many years ago. I forget exactly what year it was. It was the Olympia press conference, and Tony Freeman had the microphone. He was talking about Phil Heath, and Phil Heath had won a few Olympias, I believe, at that moment. And they were talking about, was he beatable? And Tony said, you can't put a 3-bedroom house on a 2-bedroom foundation. He said that at some point, Phil was going to start, with Phil continuing to try and chase more and more mass, at some point, he was going to blow his belly out. And Freeman was specific about that. And it turns out that ultimately that's what started to happen. So it's interesting that Chris would bring that up and Milos would bring that up about there is a limit. Obviously Andrew Jack being over 6 feet tall and having a small waist, he could probably still add more mass and never have that problem. But LABRADA, who looks absolutely phenomenal right now, that would be one of the things that he would want to be concerned about long term, is how much more mass can you put on, and at what point do you compromise that shoulder to waist ratio on his height?
I think his issue. He has a small waist. I think his issue is not his belly. I think it has something to do with carving up, because when you look at the pictures in the gym prior to the show, he didn't have that problem.
But he never had that development there that he needs to do. You can do something with it. You have the genetics, obviously, but he can improve that area, and it can be improved.
Yeah,
sure.
that's what I believe too.
And the back double bicep, where do we go with the back double bicep with those two?
Oh, well, LABRADA would not take it. Yeah, I think so.
His back improved tremendously.
Lot.
And the condition.
In the right way.
And the condition. He's got that condition now that makes it look even more impressive.
Striation in the lat.
Yeah.
And it's considerably wider. Lat spread also. Lat spread from behind. I mean, LABRADA was just going from Florida to Texas. I mean, it was like, Jesus. Ab shot, of course, is not competitive. And most muscular could probably go either way. Depends which Andrew Jack showed up. Andrew Jack in Texas last year was super impressive with size, right? At Arnold Classic, we kind of realized, for that height, he looked a little stringy, as ridiculous as it sounds.
Yeah.
So now when they're going to compare, pound for pound, I think LABRADA, has a chance. I didn't see it coming. Now I see it.
It's going to be a great top 3 with Carlos Jr. In there also. That's going to be a good-looking top 3 right there.
Yeah. I mean, so you have Carlos in third or in the top 3?
At least, yes.
Yeah. He needs to bring the condition, though.
Oh, yeah.
Sure. And he hasn't shown us the condition yet. So he has never been in real contest shape. So yeah. We can only imagine what he's going to look like when he's in real shape. So, and if you think that's what he's bringing, then he's absolutely fighting, both of these guys, But if he's slightly off, his physique is just not the same. But I believe that with the body parts,
I think LABRADA's going to peak at this next one. I think he's going to peak out at this next Texas.
I think he's definitely not getting any worse. I mean, because for him to hold it's the easiest thing, because he's been doing this for the last 4 years.
Yeah, that's August 19th, my birthday, man.
Oh, really? What are you going to be, 60?
56.
I thought maybe like a Silvio 60.
No, 56. I'm dead straight on. I don't.
It's 45.
Oh, by the way, did you get a response?
Of course not.
Stan.
Was it seen though? Was it seen?
Let me check.
Stan, we're talking about 2 weeks ago. We had Sylvia Samuel on, and I don't know if you saw the podcast or if you heard about it. And he was.
I didn't see him. Yeah, I trained with Sylvia down at Gold's Venice many years ago. Great guy.
Did you know that he won the Olympic gold medal back in 1988?
I did not know that.
Yeah, so we didn't know that either. So, but he told us on the podcast 30 years or 40 years.
It was 80.
40 years later, he told us that he won the Olympic gold medal at 17 and with a record that stood for 12 years. And then, of course, I'm half starstruck. I'm half starstruck. So I was like, "You won the fucking gold medal, and you are telling us this now? Like this is nothing?" So I go online and I'm looking it up because I want to see him, and come to find out he just lied his ass off. But he's still, and even though I'm fact checking him, he's still lying his ass off. And then he sends a message after the podcast because he was lying about a few other things. Then he sends a message after the podcast where he states that, listen, I have all the proof, and I'm going to give me a chance or something like come back on. So Milo sent him a message yesterday and gave him, he said, listen, we'll give you the up. Nobody had him on the podcast to bash him. But if you come on the podcast and you tell me your dick is fucking 2 meters long, you know what I'm saying, without you proving it, then you're telling me a lie. So, he told him that
Don't be the only fan. So.
Yeah.
You can Google it.
So he sent him a long message saying, listen, we didn't try to bash him. I'm trying to give him a fucking platform where he can talk about what he's doing now so he can, maybe, boost his business a little bit. I didn't know that he was going to give us some bullshit stories like he used to do back in the day. So, but I guess it's not responding to the offer to come back and prove to us. Because I said, if he proves to me that he's on the step with the gold medal around his neck, I will get on my knees and apologize publicly.
Yeah, all of us. Yeah, for
Milo,
sure.
was it seen?
No, yeah, he didn't open it
Oh, shit.
because he doesn't go frequently on.
Maybe somebody.
But then, what I want to know is really because every time I see you, and now I see you, you look like a goddamn powerhouse. I mean, how old are you now?
55 now. I'll be 56 in November.
All right, so 55, yeah. I'm going to be 60, so I'm 5 years older. I mean, you've been still lifting some crazy amount of weight.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have injuries. You don't have how? Okay, explain to me. Spend the 55 years of your life lifting like house and the buildings, squatting 800 pounds and no injuries.
Yeah, no, I suffered a lot of injuries throughout my career, particularly when I was competing in powerlifting. You're exposed to a lot more, I think, potential injury risk doing that. Particularly things like chronic tendonitis, the knees and the hips, pulled muscles, of course. Every muscle you can imagine, they get tired after a while. After I stopped competing when I was 45 in powerlifting, I had accumulated quite a bit of injuries, or I would just say kind of chronic pain. And I really believed that it was going to be permanent. It was more arthritic in nature. I thought it was just the cost of having put my body through everything I did. But then I just started working with some good people and decided to change the way I trained. Started getting a little smarter about it. For instance, I started moving those joints more through a greater range of motion with less load, just to put tons and tons of blood in my knees and my hips and my shoulders with more frequency, even to the point where sometimes 3 times a day for 10 minutes, I would do, say, a recumbent bike, or I would take a light dumbbell and I would do side laterals. Some really good research suggesting that those 3 10-minute bouts are better than maybe trying to train the body part twice a week in terms of rehab. And now I still lift
What
heavy.
was it? Side laterals? What else?
Yeah, for shoulders, for instance, I'll just get a really light weight. Here's what we know, and I pissed a lot of people off when I say this, but motion is the lotion. And when you look at pain, the science of pain, which now I think the most accepted scientific model is the biopsychosocial method. This came from Dr. Larimer Mosley out of Australia in his research in his book Explain Pain. It's been popularized in the U.S. by the folks at Barbell Medicine, Austin Baraki and Jordan Feigenbaum. And really what we know now is that one of the most important things you could do is move the body as much as possible, as often as possible. And when you experience pain, people tend to stop moving. They call what Greg Nuckols refers to as becoming kinesiophobic. And that's exactly the opposite of what you do, what you want to do. The body is regenerative, not degenerative. People assume that when you start lifting weights, that you're actually breaking down, you're wearing out the joint. And in fact, just the opposite is true if it's responsibly progressed, loaded and progressed. If you don't do too much too fast, and that could be true of volume or load. And so the goal would be, if you have pain, is to try and find, we say, first of all, eliminate the source. And that means if squats hurt your knees, then you got to squat lighter, or use a less range of motion, or find an alternative exercise that still allows you to move your knees or hips through range of motion and get blood in there. We see this in football players who sprain an ankle. You don't put a cast on them. You put them onto an underwater treadmill or a suspension harness, and you start getting them to move the ankle as soon as possible. We see it when you get hip surgery, hip replacement surgery. The very next morning, that patient is on a walker walking. You have to start putting blood into the joint. And so eliminate the source, find a point of entry. And that's when I said, any exercise that doesn't hurt, you use pain as an indicator, and then start moving as much as possible, as frequently, as often as possible, and progressing that over time. So I rehabilitated what was some 10 years of chronic tendonitis in my knees, hips that the doctors, 2 different surgeons said I needed hip replacement surgery, with just general movement, just lots and lots and lots of movement frequently throughout the day. So for the shoulders, I would just, maybe even initially, the shoulders were so bad, I couldn't lift a dish up and put it in the cupboard. And so I just started moving the shoulder. I think a mistake people often make is I tore a rotator cuff. And so, I had an injury. And so people start doing like little rotator cuff exercises. Well, the rotator cuff those muscles are tiny, teeny tiny. They're never gonna be very good at moving load. But while you're doing rotator cuff exercises and not moving because you have pain, your great big deltoids are starting to atrophy, and the range of motion is starting to be restricted. So the goal would be actually to start moving the deltoids as soon as possible and gradually loading those. And that's what I started doing, was actually started moving the deltoid muscle, because if you can get that stronger, it can stabilize the joint so that the rotator cuff pain becomes less significant or almost inconsequential, because you have the larger muscles moving the shoulder. And so I would just do arm raises 3 times a day for 10 minutes. And then gradually you work into like a side lateral raise. And then gradually work into, say, maybe a Viking press or something that allows you to start building deltoid strength. For the knees, recumbent bike was my go-to. I would get on a recumbent bike and I would ride under modest tension, maybe a 40-second, not really a sprint, but with some intensity, and then rest for 15, 20 seconds. And I would do that 10 times. And when I got off the bike, I would have a significant amount of blood in the joint, which is the way those joints heal. And you can't do it passively. You can't do it with massage or with injections or with electric stim or ice, because they know the muscles don't contract, and the cartilaginous structures are like sponges, and they need to be moved and squeezed to expel all of the bad stuff, and then when they open back up, they absorb all of the good stuff, the blood in and all the damage out. And so I would do that 3 times a day, and eventually the chronic tendonitis went away, and then I just started loading a little smarter. I can still lift pretty heavy now, but I don't lift heavy all the time. I use different exercises. Like if I want to be strong on deadlift, I can't deadlift every week. It would start to break me down. The fatigue would be such that I would just get tired and get weaker, maybe get injured. But I can go in and I can box squat pretty heavy, which has a very low injury potential and very low fatigue. And then I can do, say, some good mornings at maybe 70% of the 1 rep deadlift max load, and then use those exercises. They transfer well to deadlift. So I might only use the deadlift once every 4 or 5 weeks just to test my strength. But I'm training using good mornings, and also I do a lot of concentric work. We did this with John Jones too. He would set up the support bars on the squat rack, so when he brought the weight down, it would crash into the support bars. And so we would kind of deload the eccentric, because we didn't want to create excess fatigue that would carry over and make him, would negatively impact his training performance when he was wrestling or boxing. And so we would use most of the concentric movements. And that's kind of what a box squat does. It helps you deload a little bit of the eccentric and the reversal, the stretch reflex of reversing the weight. And then you're just doing most of the concentric. And concentrics, you just get less fatigue from those. And so that's the way I train now. I don't always do bench press. I'll do standing bench press just because it has less impact on my shoulders. I just find different exercises that don't hurt, and I can push them harder than, say, a free weight exercise that might potentially expose me to injury.
I watch you on the Instagram. That's why I asked. You did the crazy good mornings, and then you did the box squats, but super deep. So there goes deload on the eccentric. You still have to go all the way down. You pass the parallel. You're sitting on that cushion. So it's super interesting. And box squats. It was super heavy. So by all means, it's super inspirational. I love it. Yeah, so educational, Stan. It's a pleasure hearing you.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I wanted him to come on here.
Okay.
That's why I wanted him to come on here and this is going to be my title. My title is going to be When Stan Efferding Speaks, You Listen. I'll tell you right now, that's going to be the title.
Stan.
You know what? I wish I knew then what I know now. That's the biggest thing.
Don't we all say that though?
Yeah. And I guess that's why I appreciate you. Yeah, I appreciate you for doing what you do, because this is the message that we want to send to young cats that don't need to make all the mistakes that we made. Get a good coach. I don't know why I waited till I was 40 to start working with Flex, probably because I couldn't afford it before that. But, when I started working with Flex and then Mark Bell after that, I learned more in that. If I had learned that stuff 15 years prior, God knows what I would have been able to done as a younger man.
Yeah, well, I'm glad we had you on here, because this is going to be a very interesting episode for all the listeners, and they're going to get some good information out of this. I appreciate you, Stan. Thank you for making the time. Of course, Milos.
Thank you, guys. Of course, you're all legends. I really appreciate everything that you guys have done throughout your career and continue to do. Thank you.
You got it. Of course, Milos and Chris. I don't have to say nothing to you guys no more. You know I love you all.
Stan.
Okay, so
I really enjoyed it big time.
Yeah, well, hey, listen, I would really love to do another one in the future, because I think you have so much more to say that we didn't get to talk about this time. So maybe just look out for me. I'm gonna hit you up one more time.
Oh, awesome. Thank you, brother.
All right, take care, guys. Y'all be safe. God bless.
See you, brother.
Bye.